Tonight, it may be one small step for a man, but was it really one giant leap for mankind? 45 years ago, the 20th of July 1969, Apollo 11 reached the moon and Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin landed on a piece of rock which is around 238,857 miles away. Or at least that is what we've been told. And indeed, 5 more missions took place up until the cancellation of the Apollo program in 1972. The subsequent US Space Shuttle program retired in 2011, leaving American astronauts to hitchhike into orbit. But after 3 long years, NASA's successor is almost ready to make an entrance. Orion, the agency's newest manned spaceship, is being prepared for its first mission, apparently in December. In future missions, it will journey into deep space, to Mars and beyond, farther than humans have ever gone before. Orion comes loaded with superlatives. It boasts the largest heat shield ever built and a computer 400 times faster than the ones on the space shuttles. It will be launched into space on the most powerful rocket NASA has ever made. Except they no longer seem keen to go back to the moon first, perhaps to celebrate the 50th anniversary of those first landings in a couple of years, maybe. Only, if we are to judge by the recently abandoned Constellation program, it would appear they learned nothing from Apollo, seemingly having to start again from scratch. It's almost like they are hiding the fact that they actually never made it to the moon in the first place. They wouldn't do that, would they? Let's find out as we take on another Doomwatch. And it is 3 minutes past 6 p.m. Central Peterborough in the United Kingdom. This is Doomwatch. I am Alex G. And with me this evening, of course, the voice of the visuals, Tom Mutiny.
Good evening, all.
And, of course, taking your calls and emails and texts and your shout box derivations. Here's Lexi Manning.
Hello, everybody. Get lots of comments in.
Yes, it's going to be a comment-filled evening. And our guest this evening, very privileged to say, welcome to Marcus Allen, the UK editor of Nexus magazine. Good evening, Marcus.
Hello, Alex. How very nice to be on Doomwatch. I feel privileged as well. I hope we're able to shed light into dark corners.
Not hearing anything. We're doing so well as well. Well, Tom twiddles with a few buttons. Can we hear you now, Marcus?
Can you hear me now? Can you?
Yes, we can. There we are. There we are.
Okay.
I'm afraid we were catering to a couple of heavy metal fans, which meant jiggling about with a couple of the switches, and it's only now we're back live. So apologies for that pause, Marcus, but there we go. So the new Nexus magazine, I can wave it in front of the camera, and hopefully Tom will be able to make sure everybody sees that rather than my mush. Out it was on the streets in all your favourite newsagents, all your newsagents worth bothering with, that is, just yesterday. So, and interestingly, first off, there is this article, it is a headline, NASA unable to recreate Apollo technologies, will we ever return to the moon? And then we've also got cosmonauts reporting strange phenomena. So was that by intent, having a couple of space race related stories in there?
Yes, it's definitely by intent. And by the way, I'm not the editor of Nexus, I'm the UK publisher. The editor is Duncan Rhodes, who lives in Australia.
I give him UK editor credit, so UK publisher, fair enough.
UK publisher.
Right.
A responsible position, you might say.
Excellent stuff. So on our show page 36 at doomwatch.com, I have actually sort of furnished people with various bits and pieces about this new Orion program. But I think it'd probably be useful if I actually give the taster paragraph from this particular article that is going to be the highlight of our evening this evening. And it basically says, NASA documents on the now defunct Constellation program for a return to the moon by 2020 reveal startling evidence that the agency is still actually unable to send a manned mission to the moon. It's as if nothing has been learned from Apollo missions, and until recently, criticism was taboo. Now, it would be very easy to start from the beginning of the affair on this with everything that is wrong with Apollo as it stands with what we know. But again, that's all put down on the show page 6doomwatch.com, so people can actually see their story so far in terms of problems with the moon landing. But this article seems to take it to a completely new level.
This is why Duncan was so pleased to be able to publish it, because it's been written by a scientist, a physicist, who lives in New Zealand. He has investigated basically what NASA and the US government have put down on paper.
Yeah.
There are various reports that have been over the last 5 years since the Constellation program was originally announced by President George W. Bush in 2005. And then President Obama goes and cancels it in 2010.
Yeah.
With words basically to the effect, we're not going to the moon, we've been there, which seems to be a remarkably cynical approach. Maybe it's a very ironic approach, because have we actually been to the moon? Now, if you make this statement and say, well, have we actually landed on the moon? And most people will say, well, of course we have. I saw it on television, I've seen the films, I've read the books, I've heard the astronauts talk about it. How can we not have been there? Yeah. Until you start looking at the evidence, independent evidence, that gets very, very tricky. People start to get a little bit concerned about it, because it's one of those events in human history which everybody is familiar with. You could probably remember where you were when you heard the moon landings happen. It's a very, very important history, and one challenges it at one's peril, as I have discovered.
So, I mean, the general reaction of people, what is the reaction that you get?
Well, because I tend to be fairly straightforward about it, I say, well, if you believe we landed on the moon, where's the evidence? And they say, well, there's the photographs and the films, and there's the moon rock, of course, and then there's all the people who find firing lasers at the moon and bouncing it back, and so of course we've been there. I say, well, how do you know that all this was done the way we were told it's done? And then I usually ask another question. Do you believe everything your government tells you about everything all the time? That usually generates some sort of ironic giggle, as if to say, well, of course not. I say, well, if you don't believe that the government tells you the truth at all times about everything, where do you draw the line? Where do you say, okay, well, I believe that, but I'm not sure about that, and that's an outright piece of propaganda? Where do you draw the line with Apollo? Do you say, okay, yeah, maybe they launched? I mean, there are all sorts of wonderful pictures. I've got one here of the rocket taking off. And millions of people saw that. Millions of people watched that. That went up into space. Okay. 2 minutes after it launched, it disappears from view. And then we have to rely on NASA to tell us what happened next.
Yeah.
Well, if you believe, as I do, that NASA stands for never a straight answer, you will tend to question what they say and try to investigate it yourself. And it's not just me. There are many, many people who have investigated it and found that NASA tends to be a little bit economical with the truth. And as you mentioned in your introduction, why aren't we just using the technology that Apollo used back 45 years ago to do it again? Why do we have to start with a new rocket and a new engine and all the spacecraft? and the heat shield? It's a legitimate question.
It's interesting you should say that, because if you go and look at the NASA website now, and we've got links to the various articles, they're all now deeply pitched into Orion and the fact that Orion's got the biggest ever heat shield and all this. It's almost like what is now on there in terms of information has been put there to effectively shoo anything in terms of what this particular article in the latest edition of Nexus is postulating. They're saying, oh, well, we've solved the problem with the equivalent of the Saturn V rocket booster. We've got something bigger and better now. We've solved the problem with the heat shield, something bigger and better. And they keep listing these things, but it does beg the question. At some point, they're going to have to deliver. I mean, the article from CNN, which I lifted some of the copy from there, says by December this year. Then there's another article which says 2017. There's other people who say 2020. There's others that say 2022. It doesn't seem to be that they can even get it clear in their mind when it is. They're going to have to show us the money, if you like, in terms of what Orion really is now.
Exactly. That's a very good point. I think NASA are actually getting quite nervous about this because they know there is a lot of attention on the whole Apollo area. It just hasn't gone away. Mm-hmm. What you've got is this situation with Orion. Orion is the space capsule which is equivalent to the Apollo space capsule. It's just, as you say, bigger and better. It's supposed to be able to carry between 4 and 6 astronauts.
Yep.
Now, the test at the end of this year, I think it's December, it's been launched. We're not told how it's going to be launched, but it's only going to fly up to about 4,000 miles above the Earth's surface and then come back. Because the heat shield, and this is a critical part of any manned spaceflight, the heat shield to protect the astronauts on their return into the Earth's atmosphere. If you return from the space station or the space shuttle, the temperature generated is about 1,600 degrees centigrade. If you come back from the moon, the heat shield will generate a temperature of 2,700 degrees centigrade, nearly 50% higher. And if you look at the inverse square law, it's going to take a great deal of energy. It requires a great deal of energy to be dissipated. This test of Orion is only going up to it's only going to come back exhibiting a temperature of about 2,200 degrees centigrade, which isn't a full test. Because when they started to build the heat shield for Orion, obviously the question was, well, why don't we just use what they used on Apollo? It was obviously worked for that. Let's use it again. They couldn't find the formula. It's ridiculous. They couldn't find it. They couldn't recreate it. They can't even recreate the Saturn V rocket. They've lost the blueprints. And this rocket, this Ares 5 rocket, which is supposed to launch the heavy lift cargo supply ships, the engines on the Saturn V rocket developed 1.5 million pounds of thrust. And there were 5 of them. They were very powerful, and they could lift 120 tons into Earth orbit and deliver 50 tons to lunar orbit. The new rocket has engines of only half that power, 800,000 pounds of thrust. This thing won't get past low Earth orbit. NASA are in a real problem.
So, I mean, the thing is, again, once you look at the public relations material, or shall we actually now call it propaganda, the whole thing falls apart, because when compared to what there was before with Apollo, it doesn't even touch what Apollo had previously.
Exactly. That is the point. That is now becoming blindingly obvious, and is causing NASA considerable anguish as to how they managed to explain away that everything appeared to work very successfully with Apollo. All the missions over 3 years went successfully and got back successfully. Now they're not even sure they can get the rocket up off the ground, let alone the heat shield to protect them to come back. If any of those don't work, dead astronauts, I'm afraid. And that's not what they want.
I mean, the thing is, straight away, I'm thinking of the space shuttle disasters, which again, if I remember correctly, at least one of those was heat shield problems.
One was caused by the very low temperatures on the launch pad that froze the rings that sealed various parts of the solid rocket boosters. Yeah. And the heat of the rocket basically got through these rings and exploded into the main tank. That's the large piece of rocket which was basically exploded. The Columbia, the second one, Challenger, part of the heat shield on the shuttle was damaged on launch. Quite a large piece of ice detached itself from the rocket engine, from the rocket fuel tank, and damaged the heat shield itself. Now, they knew this had happened. They knew there had been damage to the heat shield because they saw the piece of ice come off and hit the heat shield on the shuttle. Yeah. And they basically risked the fact that the shuttle would burn up on re-entry. I mean, 1,600 degrees, that's very, very hot. Mm-hmm. And that starts, if you're not protected from that, well, you get dead astronauts. That's what happens without a heat shield.
And I think this is this all sort of joined together as to why the heat shield is so important. Okay, in that point, it was damage to it. It should work conventionally, being the sort of Earth orbits that we're talking about. But just to emphasize this for the people coming into this, we're talking about when you travel back from the moon, the temperature is much more excessive when you try to re-enter Earth orbit. It's a huge factor of difference in terms of the temperature that heat shield is going to have to endure. And I put this together with the fact that, yes, the moon, been there, done that, got the T-shirt or whatever, but we're going to go to Mars now. So it begs the question, will they be travelling even further to Mars? So the heat shields, I assume, are going to have to be even better in terms of the temperature they can withstand.
It would probably be about the same temperature because the re-entry speed from the moon is basically the same speed at which you leave Earth, 25,000 miles an hour. The problem with going to Mars, which, by the way, is never going to happen, the problem with Mars is the radiation in space. Now, this is a subject which it's very hard to get decent answers to it. You know, when you talk about radiation, most people assume, well, that's X-rays. You know, that's X-rays generated by the sun. And there are also all the other things in deep space. Space is a very, very hostile environment for humans to get anywhere near. Yeah. If you're going to spend 9 months, which is the time it takes to get from Earth to Mars on one of our rather crude chemical rockets, if you're going to spend 9 months, you're exposed to solar radiation for all that time. Now, why do you think when you have a tooth X-ray, the technician operating the equipment wears a lead apron? Because X-rays are dangerous.
They go hide out of the room, which is another trick.
Yeah, they'll go out of the room. It's because radiation is cumulative in the human body. You say, well, we've been to the moon. They were away from Earth's protective layers. That's the Van Allen radiation belts. Astronauts were away from that for up to 2 weeks on Apollo 17. And they don't appear to have suffered any adverse effects from radiation. So why can't they just look at the technology that NASA obviously has available and the research and the investigation into radiation? Why don't they just use that? No, they're having to go back to square one and start all over again. This is ludicrous stuff.
Crazy. Anyway, 20 minutes past 6 p.m. Time for a station break. The first little ad will tell you how to get in touch via text or via email. And straight after the break, we'll be filling you in on why I went to prison. Talk to you very, very shortly.
Use your mobile phone to keep in touch with Peterborough FM. Why not text us on 60777? That's 60777. Begin your message with 337PC. That's 337PC. PC for Peterborough Community. A space, then your comment. Standard network text charges apply. Alternatively, send us an email via studio@peterborough.fm. That's studio@peterborough.fm. One station, many communities. And we're waiting to hear from you.
It's almost time for the Peterborough Beer Festival, now in its 37th year. But this time it's going to be very different. The 5-day gathering runs from Tuesday the 19th to Saturday the 23rd of August, taking over the embankment. And Peterborough FM will be broadcasting there live every day. Find us on the music stage at various times during the afternoons and early evenings alongside a whole host of excellent music artists and bands. Come and say hi and meet some of Peterborough FM's volunteer presenters and even get yourself a dedication. So now there's even more reason to come and support a local event that's become one of the biggest of its type in the country. Peterborough FM at the 2014 Beer Festival. One station, many communities, and a whole lot of taste.
Detection Observation. Official Dom Media. Worldwide analysis. Technology. Corruption. Health. This is the definition of Doomwatch.
Okay, it is 22 minutes after 6 p.m. and Alex G here, Central Peterborough, UK. My guest is Marcus Allen, the UK publisher of Nexus magazine. Welcome back to the show, Marcus.
Good to be back.
Lovely, lovely. Right, we're going to have a few interjections before we go to Lexi on what's been said by the various bods about. But yes, teased you before the break and said I went to jail yesterday. I did. I did not pass go. I did not collect £200 and all that. But there was a very serious reason for this. As many of you will know, and will have also heard about this on previous editions of Doomwatch, Melanie Shaw, who is effectively a whistleblower about incidents of child abuse, who has actually suffered herself in this and is now trying to reveal all this to the world, has effectively been treated in the most peculiar way. And I'm being very kind when I say that to the establishment, in a very peculiar way in terms of how she's being treated in the prison process. So let me just give you a Reader's Digest version of this. She's there allegedly because of a charge of arson and also criminal damage, I think, are the two things. One involved apparently spreading paint over a neighbour several doors down on her street, on their house. And another one was burning their garden shed down, which apparently had tens of thousands of pounds of equipment in it. Well, I don't know any garden shed that's got tens of thousands of pounds of equipment in it, but there we go. Obviously, she might be able to lend those particular neighbours might be able to lend the equipment to NASA, and they might be able to do a better job from whatever's in that garden shed. Who knows? But I mean, getting to the serious side of things, there aren't many of us, I should think, who have actually gone into a prison to visit in this day and age. And it actually took 50 minutes from the time that Brian Gerrish of the UK column and myself, from the time we got through the doors, the initial first doors, to actually getting to sit down and await Melanie to be brought out to talk to us. Most incredible thing, it was almost like some sort of bizarre cross between airport security and the Crystal Maze. It really was completely bananas. So the first thing you do, It's got the same atmosphere as if you're sort of queuing up at the airport ready to go through all the scanners and whatever. You have to take your passport in and pieces of ID which demonstrate your address, so utility bills, bank bills, whatever else. So what they do, they check your passport, they scan that and whatever. Then they ask you to look up, because there's a camera there, look up so that they can take a picture of you. So they take a picture of you there. And then there is a finger reader, an index finger reader in front of you. It's a nice little red flashing light, looks like, part of the front of kit off Knight Rider. And you have to put your finger down and wait, and then take it off, and then ask to put it down again. And you do that 3 times so that they've got your perfect fingerprint. Of course, all these biometrics being absorbed into the system, but we are told that there is no need to worry, because once you've stopped visiting prison, of course, it will all be destroyed and not sold on. Of course, we wouldn't do that, would we? Mm-hmm. So that was the intriguing thing. Then you go to effectively have to put all your valuables into a locker. They give you a locker key. Luckily, it's free, so you put your stuff in your locker. Anything metal, your rings, your watches, your wallets, and whatever. The only things that you're allowed to take through are up to £20 in cash, so you can spend it on teas and coffees at their tuck shop, basically. And of course, your locker key. Anything else metallic, you're severely encouraged not to take with you, unless you put it on the side in one of your margarine tubs while you walk through the scanner to be scanned for any metallic objects. Then you have a front and back search. Bear in mind, they've only got for one person searching. So I had a little old lady searching me doing the sort of, on the cross pose as everything's checked. Even you have to open your mouth and check there's nothing in your mouth. So there you go. Then you go into a holding area and wait until there's enough people there and there's somebody else to come across and effectively take you further into the dominion, as it were. You then go into this electronic box. Is about the only thing I can describe it with, sliding doors and whatever. So sliding doors to one side where you go in. There's another sliding door where you come out, and there's another one where you go through into the heart of the prison. So you go in there, and if you're claustrophobic, you're not going to like this at all, because it really does feel like at any moment they're going to just put the gas into this box, this clear perspex box. Then when you're all in, eventually they get round to releasing you, and you then go out of that door, cross some heavy doors and a courtyard, another set of heavy doors, and then actually get into the complex itself. Climb a couple of sets of stairs, and here's the great bit. Then, after all these bits and pieces, checking everything, you've got nothing on you. You then have, and as I say, this is the game show Crystal Maze stage. You have on the floor in this other room, on the floor, circles with numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each individual has to stand on number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. So just the way it sort of worked out, I was on circle 1. And this is where they bring Rex, or whatever his name, the very large dog who is obviously sick to death of doing this. Go, oh, here we go, another 5. Yeah. And of course, it was like I was standing there, and of course, I'm straight looking at the dog, and I do what I normally do with dogs and cats. It works better with cats, but dogs respond to it as well. And I was just staring at him, blinking. So it was sort of like, I thought, I wonder what's going to happen. Devil for punishment, definitely. So I'm just blinking at the dog, and the dog's looking at me going, oh, thinking, oh, is that good or is that bad? So literally it was like, okay, check. It was what the lady handler said. And of course, the dog just gets up on his hind legs in front of me going, hello, hello, nice to see you. And of course, the woman's looking at me going, he's got drugs on him, he's got drugs on him. I said, it's probably the cats, he can smell my cat. They all say that. I think that was a joke, though. So we all get checked, and then we're into another holding area, and finally we get let loose in the meat area, where it's absolutely huge ceiling, really, really high, and you've got blocks of four chairs around these sort of very low slung tables. And so we walked into there, and it was like, well, what do we do now? Because first thing they do is, before you can get in there, you've got another electronic gate system. So you have to put your finger on their scanner, put your finger on the scanner, beep, and your picture comes up on the screen. So that's right, you're all right to enter. So then, you're buzzed in, so you can go through that little procedure. And again, at that point, it's like, well, what do we do now? And I thought, well, he looks important, that guy right over the far side. So we go over, announce who we're here to see, and eventually Melanie's brought out to us. And from the time she's brought out, we've got an hour to effectively talk to her and find out how she's doing. And the majority of what we were saying was just reassuring her that there are people out here in the wider world who are doing what they can for her. And I mean, she said, please don't send any more stamps. She's got tons and tons of stamps. And, Brian and I are going to work out how we can sort out some flowers for her. She said, apparently, when you're on remand, you can have flowers. So we're just working out how on earth we can sort that out for her. So that's on our to-do list, if you like. But it's the most extraordinary procedure, because by the end of it, you do wonder, who is the criminal here? I'm visiting, and I've literally been completely integrated into their system. They know what I look like. They've got my picture. They've got my passport details. They've got my fingerprints. And it's just sort of like, all this just to, visit prisoners. It just seems like a sledgehammer to sort of crush a peach from the way I look at it. Anyway, so Melanie's in good spirits. She's powered on by the fact that the truth will come out now because of the publicity that is out there. So it is a question of getting her story out there, and particularly to outlets in the Nottingham area where she lives. Of course, this is the other thing, which is bananas. She lives in Nottingham, but she's sent to Peterborough Prison, which is about 3/4 of an hour away. We're 3/4 of an hour away on the road. What's going on here? And if you've been listening to the UK Column News, you will have heard all about the first hearing that she has had. And the judge commented on there being no evidence, but still put her on remand. So work that one out. Where's the judge's loyalties in here? There is no evidence. He's saying there's no evidence. The prosecution were faffing and kerfuffling. They had nothing concrete, but promised they would do soon. So she's on remand on the basis that the prosecution at some point will find the evidence that they think will absolutely nail her for throwing paint on the house and burning down a garden shed. So that's it. That's what can get you virtually a situation where you are on trial with no evidence, but that doesn't mean they're going to let you go. Quite crazy. But as I say, her message was, keep fighting the fight. This is where it's important. She appreciates that this could well be a big story once it's made to break in the mainstream. Anyway, that's enough for me. Hopefully I've given you a vivid picture of what it's actually like trying to visit someone in jail, let alone being in jail. Now time to hear from Lexi as to what you've all been saying.
You've been saying lots and lots, and Wendy Hurst sent in a text about Melanie saying, has Melanie applied for judge in chamber bail? Her solicitors should do this automatically. Go Banks on the moon. Imagine trying to fire a projectile 240,000 miles in a vacuum with the intention of reverse parking it on an object spinning opposite to the inertia travelled. When do they slow down and stop? Never mind reverse park. I am not David Icke says, if NASA could fool the world in 1969, imagine what they could do now, 46 years on, with the technology we have. Ken 50. Apollo 13 is a giveaway. Lifting off at 1300 hours and 13 minutes, I believe, and entering the moon's gravity on April 13th. Really? Numerology for beginners. NASA stands for never a straight answer. Go Banks. The Clangers were better filmed. I do love the Clangers.
Yeah, Peter Fermi was terrific. Yeah, we'll go with that.
I am not David Icke. Why bother with radiation shielding in the 21st century when it was absolutely no issue in 1969? D. Oberman, wasn't there one photo with all three of them in it? Who took that? Oh, Tom's arm. Hello.
Yes, Tom's forgotten that you're on camera, but there we go. So that object was Tom's arm.
Wasn't there one photo with all three of them on it? Who took that? Or was it the world's first selfie?
Well, yeah, from a range. Chuck the camera in the air, rush along, rush away, and then rush back.
Maybe. Yeah. UK Kev, has anyone seen the NASA Illuminati card? It shows a fake moon landing being filmed.
Oh, I'll have to look that set up again. I've got that at home. Right, okay. Yeah.
D. Oberman says 16,000 degrees Celsius melts steel in next to no time. Fraggle, has the argument been raised at the public's lack of knowledge regarding what the military has? NASA is a military-run public body.
Interesting.
Yeah.
D. Oberman, why do we see photos at all? Shouldn't the film have been destroyed by the radiation? Look at some film footage from Chernobyl. They started to deteriorate after only a few minutes of exposure.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a text from Sean in Bicester. He says, inside Orion is a clean room, which means absolutely no dust, and the spacemen even have an airlock to change into their spacesuits to prevent dust getting into the capsule. Lots of trouble to go to. And then it says, has the original astronauts trampled dust in and out of the capsule or limb and raced around in a moon buggy, throwing up massive trails of dust?
Wow.
Ken 50 on the prison says, good job Alex didn't have his stripy jacket on or he wouldn't have got out. I agree. He makes me wear it as well. I wouldn't have got out either.
Well, only when it's cold and cool in the studio. I mean...
Hold on, I think I've got the worst one with the yellow and white one. I think
yes, that's quite hideous as well.
But nobody's offered to buy a virtual cornetto off you yet, and you keep offering. Nobody wants a virtual cornetto.
We do need Doomwatch tops.
Yeah. That's becoming a very, very long story. Anyway, in terms of what we've got there, Marcus, any comments on some of the feedback on the NASA stories there?
There's some very interesting points on that, mainly because people are looking at it from a logical point of view. When you make the comment, very interesting comment about the photographs. Yes, when people took photographs at Chernobyl, they were very, very quickly fogged, or the increased contrast. This is what you'd expect to happen. Do you remember that years ago when you came back through airport security, and you always advised that you should put your camera and your film through for a hand search and not put it through the X-ray machines? Why? Because X-rays fog film. There's a lot of X-rays out in space, so you've got all this nonsense going on about radiation not being a problem. Radiation is a serious problem, and it could be considered to be the showstopper of space. It's the one thing that is not going to get us through. And I like the points about Apollo 13. And there's a very good book, which I can recommend to anybody, one very simple reason, that if Apollo 13 had landed without incident at the place it was supposed to land, at the time it was supposed to land, the site would have been in darkness. So it was never really intended to land. It was always a rather dramatic piece of space opera. They were never really in danger because they were actually in Earth orbit. Now, you can demonstrate this quite conclusively by looking at the films of the real Apollo 13, not the Tom Hanks version, the real Apollo 13, and you see them sitting rather morosely in their lunar module, waiting to go around the moon to come back to Earth, not having landed. And surprisingly, out of the window, or the windows on the lunar module show a very distinct blue color. Well, the only thing in space that is blue is the Earth. So were they just in orbit around the Earth? And was the whole thing a fabrication to generate interest in space travel and put more money in the defense contractors who were in the process of building all these wonderful pieces of kit, which ironically they weren't going to use? There is 3 Saturn V rockets that were never used.
Crazy stuff. Crazy.
It is. There's one thing I'd just like to show you, just one thing, which very few people may have seen this. Mm-hmm. This is a piece of moon rock.
Oh, right.
Well, I say it's a piece of moon rock. Mm-hmm. Can you prove it's not?
Oh, right.
It looks like a piece of moon rock.
How would I know what to compare it to?
Well, exactly. Now, you can go to the Science Museum and you can see a similar piece of rock to that in the space section, and it's enclosed in a glass container, and it has on the side of it moon rock. So you know what you're looking at.
Pretty good to say Acme.
Any different from anything else. And how about that piece of moon rock that was discovered? You know, when the Rijksmuseum was undergoing some renovation a few years back,
yep,
they dismantled all of the displays, and one of the displays was showing a piece of moon rock that was presented to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands by the Apollo 11 astronauts. Excuse me. When they, 30 years later, they were renovating the Rijksmuseum, and they decided to examine this piece of moon rock.
Right.
And horror of horrors, shock. It was a piece of petrified wood.
Oh, my giddy on.
And you can see, I mean, if anybody wants to check that one out, just go onto the BBC News websites, and you can see it's up there. Or put it into Google, fake moon rock. And the story's there. And in fact, the Rijksmuseum are so amused by this, they've kept it as a curio.
Oh, my God. Anyway, it is 17 minutes to 7 p.m. Dr. Graham Downing is coming up in the next break. Still more from Marcus to come, honestly, so stay with us. But we've got Graham Downing on to talk about the Ebola epidemic. What's that all about? We're going to tell you. Here's how you text in or email.
Use your mobile phone to keep in touch with Peterborough FM. Why not text us on 60777. That's 60777. Begin your message with 337PC. That's 337PC. PC for Peterborough Community. A space, then your comment. Standard network text charges apply. Alternatively, send us an email via studio@peterborough.fm. That's studio@peterborough.fm. One station, many communities. And we're waiting to hear from you.
Are you ready for the Peterborough Social? It's a new show on Peterborough FM with a look at days and nights out in our area, including venues, history, food, drink and entertainment. Brought to you with the active participation of members of the Peterborough Campaign for Real Ale, the series delves into issues that influence what's out there and what's available. It will also include the latest news on the 37th Annual Peterborough Beer Festival. Join us on Tuesdays between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. on peterborough.fm.
Reporting today for a future tomorrow. The watchdog you can trust. This is Doomwatch.
And it is near enough 7:15 Central Peterborough in the United Kingdom. Friday night, your date with Doomwatch, 6 until 8 p.m. With me is Marcus Allen from Nexus magazine, the UK publisher. Welcome back again, Marcus.
Thank you very much. It's always good to be here. You do a good show. And you've got some very good audience. They're asking very, very good questions.
Oh, so we've trained them well. And they've trained themselves well. I can't take the credit for their activities. Meantime, hopefully joining us on the phone, Dr. Graham Downing. Graham, welcome back to Doomwatch.
Hi, Alex. How are we doing?
All right. All the better that that connection just worked just like that. That's excellent. So, in terms of Ebola, this is seeming now to start ratcheting up in terms of people being worried about people getting into America, being carted into America with the Ebola virus to be sort of looked after. Natural News commented Emory University Hospital in Atlanta is set to receive a patient infected with the deadly Ebola disease currently sweeping through swathes of West Africa, The Guardian reports. The patient is reportedly one of the American doctors who was recently infected with the disease. This event will make the first time in history that a level 4 biohazard infectious agent is being transported by air into a large US city while still multiplying inside a living patient. This startling revelation brings up all sorts of questions. So they certainly do bring up all sorts of questions. What's the sort of risk on something like this? Surely they must have him sort of, contained in sort of biohazard spheres or something, so that we don't need to worry that they're going to probably look at him to work out how to cure it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real Ebola is a very interesting thing. It's kind of the bogeyman of the viruses. That as soon as you hear that, everyone goes into panic. But I was up to 4 a.m. looking at this story as it was unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to get to bed. I've lost patience in the morning. But
Yeah.
it's a real interesting thing because not a lot of people know about it. But when you actually look at it, it's a virus. Okay, it has a very high mortality rate, between 50 and 90%. But when you really look at it, how much of that is actually down to the fact that it's the deadly virus compared to how much is down to the fact that it's just not been handled particularly well on the scene? You're dealing with people who aren't particularly well trained, who don't really have much money or much equipment. Because when you look into detail, and I looked through various research on this, and through actual cases and how they were treated. In one instance, there was 8 cases that were being treated at the same time. Mm-hmm. And these people were actually treated pretty well by comparison. They had some good drugs on board if there was any secondary infections, had steroids on board to control the inflammation, all the rest of it. And they had good blood transfusion, a good barrier method in terms of how they were dealing. And 7 out of those 8 people just walked out and lived. So it brought the kind of mortality rate down to sort of the survival rate into the upper 80%, as opposed to only 10% surviving. So there's a lot of hysteria, but how much of this, as I said, this hysteria is fueled by the fact that really these patients aren't being adequately treated at source. And there was, in fact, I think we've only ever had one patient in Europe or in the West, and that was someone in Switzerland, and she was treated for a couple of weeks. In the end, she walked out of hospital, no one else got infected, and it was happy days. So now, I'm not, by no stretch of imagination, I'm saying we still stay in bed and not worry at all. I'm not saying that. But by the same token, we have to have a clear head on this. And what appears to be happening is that, there seems to be a lot of coincidences going on here. A lot of hysteria is being whipped up. And I'm certainly no expert geopolitical man, as you know. I mean, you guys, that's your bag. I think becoming more and more. I was a skeptic. I'm becoming less of a skeptic. The more we discuss these things, because you start to think, hold on a minute, this looks like it's a Hollywood script. Unraveling. And it's not just Ebola. They're now talking about, there's AIDS problems now, and hold on, the polio thing's not doing as well as what we thought, and the TB, and there's all this kind of sensationalistic stuff. I know you've really got to get close to someone and actually touch them and actually to actually catch them.
And the thing is that they are already talking about, we're going to have to sort of have a mass vaccine.
Well, there you go.
Regimen.
I mean, from our prior conversations when I spoke originally at AB5, my fear on the table was that this was going to happen. And actually, I thought, they might use something like Ebola virus to do this, if that's the case. And I can't definitively say that is the case. But if we're sort of going on the balance of probabilities here and just following that line of thought, then if, this is how they're going to do it. If they're going to spread fear, they're going to start, I thought, they're going to go, immigrant found from Africa, and boom, then it comes out in the paper. They start to bring out this story about an immigrant detained, and it turned out to be nothing in the end. And then I thought it'll most likely be a soldier returning from Africa. Over there. And these things are starting to be planted, and this hysteria is starting to be built up. And, and then you think, you've now got, I think it was the guy in charge of the borders, is it whoever it is, the minister in charge at that moment, he's now saying, well, no, we have to have preventative measures. And they're all starting to do these things. And on the back of this hysteria, then they start to bring in their mass vaccination campaign and all the rest of it. And you can start to see how they're building this. They're testing the waters. So,
bear with me a moment. There's a news flash just coming in. Tom, please.
No, it's not actually. It was actually on the news this morning. I just thought I'd mention it because you're talking about the Ebola virus. There's this athlete from the Sierra Leone at the Commonwealth Games who's just had to be tested for it. Apparently, he's been quarantined for 4 days leading up to it. But yeah, he's been tested for the Ebola virus at the Commonwealth Games.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, it's just at the time of the Commonwealth Games and athlete. I mean, you can just, you can see if this had. I mean, look, I don't know if it's been scripted or not, and I hope to God it hasn't, and this will all be dealt. But as you said, you can't, because of all the things and the irregularities. Let's put it that with all these things, especially the swine flu when that came on board, which is acknowledged now, even in the British Medical Journal. And the editor spoke saying that WHO lost all credibility over it. In other words, saying it looks like there's payolas going on here. Yeah. And that was never put on the news. And lots of us were instrumental in trying to bring awareness to the public of that. That was fast. But what people may not know is that they were testing a vaccine.
Right.
And this was going on at the same time, just before, from January they've been testing. And this is a very similar form to the swine flu, where they were testing the vaccine for that in San Antonio. And obviously they were getting poor Mexicans and giving them this vaccine. And eventually we got an outbreak, surprise, swine flu. So there's a similar pattern here. And what you may or may not know is there's a bioweapons lab there in that area, which is working with Ebola. And surprise, surprise, it's funded by George Soros and also Bill Gates Foundation.
Oh dear! Right.
Oh dear! And it goes. Now I can't deny or confirm that at the moment. I'm only going on all reports that I've seen. And apparently, there was a nurse, which have now said an ex-nurse, who's going into town saying, "Look, we think they're giving it to people, not exactly that it's the other way around. They're trying to work away." And she was arrested, and she's now she's apparently a mental patient.
Oh, that trick as well. Yes.
Mental health issues. Now, like I said, I can't I confirm, but these things are coming out. And the other thing, I'm just trying to remember the guy's name. I think it was, let me just see, I think it's Glenn Thomas.
Yeah.
Who is an ex-BBC producer, and he is now the head of the publicity for the WHO.
Yeah.
And apparently, this is what the suggestion is that he was the guy in the middle trying to field all this, and he may have known a little bit too much, a little bit more than what he should have known, and apparently, guess where he ended up?
Go on.
He was on the plane that went down over Ukraine.
Oh, right. Nothing to see here. Move along. Yeah.
Now, this could all be an incredible coincidence. Mr. Soros could be wonderful, and so could our computer tycoon, and they could be. And this lab would, is absolutely doing the best work it can. And the fact that the Africans in the area are all barricading themselves and don't want anyone going near them because they're fearful they're actually giving it to them.
Yeah.
But we're told on the news that they're all incredibly silly because they're saying that it's evil spirits causing it and all the rest of it. We've been told a different story, but it appears that maybe they're not silly. I don't know.
No.
You roll this dice along that pathway. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're a bit more clued up than what we are.
Just time for one final question, Graham. In terms of what people are going to think when they're listening in here is, so what we're saying is that this is an initiative to enforce people to have a vaccine, whether they want it or not. But why would they do that? What's the bottom line? What's the end game of getting past all this that everybody has to have that vaccine?
Well, I mean, first of all, I can't obviously guarantee that. But if you start to on the balance of probabilities and put some of these dots together, say, okay, let's just take it down that far. Then there are, then there's evidence building, and there's certainly some people that I respect who start to say, well, hold on a minute. This all goes back to that world population agenda. It always goes back to wanting to reduce population. And a very effective way of doing that is by injecting people with things that make them ill down the line. We know, for example, the first vaccine most definitely called cancer. in with the SV40 virus, the polio. I mean, that's well established.
Yeah.
And so it's not, this isn't such a stretch of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And also it brings in the civil liberties go out the window, because if they can declare an emergency, they can bring all sorts of contingencies in. And really, and I looked through that the kind of rules and regulations, and at a local level, officials can act in a way that they think they see fit in order to, quote unquote, protect the public. If the public being injected with something, even based on such a flimsy premise as what we've just been discussing, then then all sorts of things are open. And you've got the whole thing we discussed is what the chief medical officer talked about, predicting the future with detention centres on the edge of the city. Those were her words, not mine.
Our very own FEMA camps on the doorstep, and this is how.
He also said that they will be known as death camps. Now, when I read that, I nearly fell over. That was someone of standing saying it. So.
And again, the problem we have is we're listening to this with our own sense of empathy and thinking, well, these people would be monsters and villains. And the fact is, this is the sort of psychopathic behaviour that we can expect from these people. We've seen them. These are the people who can kill 1 million people in a war and then say, oh, let's kill 1 million more.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm kind of a reluctant conspiracy theorist. Want of a better word, because I'm getting dragged more into it the more I see things start to if you see things line up in a particular way, you'd have to be stupid to ignore it.
Yeah.
And you tend to see the same players involved in these things. It can't be a twin. Well, I hope to God it is, and I hope to God this thing's just going to blow over. But I mean, really and truthfully, there shouldn't really be any major threat. It's very, very difficult to catch.
Yeah.
Because it can be quite lethal quite quick in certain areas. People kill very quickly. It doesn't spread. I mean, the difference with this is it does appear to be multi-centred as opposed to just in one village.
Yeah.
But how much of that is because people may have been helping this along? And I think that the damage here is in the fear and and then what happens. It's the old thing, isn't it? It's problem, reaction, solution. The public is crying out to be vaccinated, lining up with their babies, God forbid, and then asking the Prime Minister, why aren't you detaining more people? And you can just see the way this could unfold. God forbid it does. You don't want that.
No, absolutely not. Great. Thanks very much for joining us at such short notice and giving us sort of that aspect. Again, this is the thing. They've been looking for a trigger to bring in this population reduction and effectively martial law throughout the world, not just the country. And this would appear to be it. Great. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll have you again on the show very soon, because I know people have been asking.
Great, Alex. I'll speak to you soon. I'll listen to the rest of the show. Take it easy, mate.
Bless you, man. Cheers for now. Right, well, there we go. Marcus, I've got about a minute. Any particular quick comment on what you've just heard there from Dr. Graham Downing?
Very interesting point about the population reduction. Have a look at the Georgia guide stones.
Oh, yes.
Very strange story. These are real stones in Georgia, in America. They were paid for in cash. They're about 20 foot high, made of granite. And the person who paid them was called a Christian. Nobody knows who it is, but they paid cash, about $1 million. Have a look at what those guide stones say about population reduction.
Good stuff. We just need to take a very, very quick station break to take us up to the top of the hour. We'll be back with Marcus Allen, the UK publisher of Nexus magazine, after the break for hour 2 with a lot more information on problems with the moon landings. Stay with us.
Use your mobile phone to keep in touch with Peterborough FM. Why not text us on 60777? That's 60777. Begin your message with 337PC. That's 337PC. PC for Peterborough Community. A space, then your comment. Standard network text charges apply. Alternatively, send us an email via studio@peterborough.fm. That's studio@peterborough.fm. One station, many communities. And we're waiting to hear from you.
It's almost time for the Peterborough Beer Festival, now in its 37th year. But this time it's going to be very different. The 5-day gathering runs from Tuesday the 19th to Saturday the 23rd of August, taking over the embankment. And Peterborough FM will be broadcasting there live every day. Find us on the music stage at various times during the afternoons and early evenings alongside a whole host of excellent music artists and bands. Come and say hi and meet some of Peterborough FM's volunteer presenters and even get yourself a dedication. So now there's even more reason to come and support a local event that's become one of the biggest of its type in the country. Peterborough FM at the 2014 Beer Festival. One station, many communities, and a whole lot of taste.
This is peterborough.fm and ukcolumn.org/live, broadcasting to the world live and direct in sound and in vision. Welcome to hour 2 of tonight's edition of Doomwatch. Past 7 p.m. Central Peterborough in the United Kingdom. Friday night is your Doomwatch night. This is hour 2 of tonight's show. If you're listening via the podcasts on peterborough.fm, if you're saying hour 2, I didn't hear hour 1, you need to scroll down one more. We have the most recent first. Scroll down one more and come back to this one. Our guest this evening is Marcus Allen, the UK publisher of Nexus magazine. Welcome back, Marcus.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And I hope
carry on, yes.
I just hope you're going to ask me those hard questions that people want answered as to why we may not have gone to the moon.
I am hoping that we're going to get some from our shout boxes and texts. I hope there are some agnostics or definitely violently opposed to the possibility that we did not go to the moon, because we want to hear what... Defend it, guys. We want to hear the defense, because I'm of the generation who was old enough to remember us landing on the moon and seeing the pictures. I think there is even cine film somewhere in my late father's collection of us actually watching the TV as it was happening. Gosh, if I could ever find that. Well, we shall see. But this is the problem. There are going to be people after the fact going, well, you didn't ask this, you didn't say that. Well, that's not true because, well, we want to hear all the questions. And people in the shout box, tell you what, be deliberately obtuse with us. Be deliberately obstructive here. Give us the questions that all the people that you encounter who tell you the moon landings are for real, get the points from them. Let's tell us what they tell you is the reason why they believe in the moon landings. Aside of which, first point that always comes up in my direction, Marcus, is they say, oh, well, too many people would have had to be involved.
That is one of those classic, well, how could you possibly expect this to happen with 400,000 people involved in the Apollo program? You can't keep 400,000 people quiet. No, you're quite right. You can't, and you wouldn't need to. Yes, 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program, and the vast majority, 99%, probably even more, were doing the very best job they could. They were building the best rockets, the best engines, the best spacesuits, the best controls centers. They were doing what they were trying to ensure that their late president, John Kennedy, who laid down the challenge in 1961 to land a man on the moon before the decade is out, was fulfilled. That's what they were trying to do. There are other areas where you also have to look where approximately the same number of people were involved in the Manhattan Project in the early 1940s. That didn't leak out. The D-Day landings involved 1.5 million people. That didn't leak out until it happened. The way that you keep something like this under wraps is you make it a matter of national security. And then most people will go along with it and say, okay, yeah, I'm a patriot. I support my country. I want to do the best for my country. Of course, I'm not going to make any stupid comments. At the most, I would estimate 20 to 30 people were aware of the deception that was being played out. Now, how it happened would take about an hour to explain, but the way in which it was done was with computers, with simulations. This wasn't done in the Nevada desert or in Area 51. Those are just ridiculous ideas. It was done quite openly. You hide things in plain sight.
Yes.
When they were training for this moon landing lark, it was all done quite legitimately, quite real, at various simulation sites around America. There's nothing secret about it at all. It was all filmed, it was all photographed, which is what you'd expect. That's how you debrief people when they've done something. You say, look, Buzz, don't put your foot on the ladder at that point, you'll fall off it. That's how you debrief somebody. Now, if you then go along with the idea that it involves hundreds of thousands of people to keep a secret, you haven't been paying attention. That is not the way the world works. Now, let's look at a few other things that people might consider objections to this strange idea that maybe Apollo wasn't quite the way it was proposed. Why didn't the Russians blow the whistle? The Russians were in competition with the Americans, weren't they? Well, that's the normally held view. Yeah, the Russians were in competition. The Russians had been very successful. They had the first man in space, first woman in space, they had many space firsts. Yep. So they saw America's rockets blowing up on the launch pad, and they thought, okay, we don't really have too much to worry about with America. Now, if the Americans are going to do something that the Russians might object to, what control would the Americans have over the Russians to stop them doing this? And just because America is an alleged democracy and Russia isn't, or the Soviet Union as it was at the time, the Soviet Union was not a democracy. It was a dictatorship. There were several things happening, one of which is very much in the news at the moment, is the supply of natural gas from Russia into Europe. And how Russia could, if it got very upset, turn off the supply of natural gas and all of Europe will freeze. Well, that may well happen if they turn it off, but it won't happen in Britain because we actually don't take any gas from Russia. We take it from Norway primarily and from Qatar. But Germany, on the other hand, does take quite a lot of natural gas from the Soviet Union then and Russia now. Now, I decided to have a look at this and decided that when were these contracts for the supply of natural gas from Russia into Europe first drawn up? And the answer, very surprisingly, was in the late 1960s. The supply was going to come into Europe, firstly into Austria, secondly into Italy, and thirdly into Germany. And the reason it was going into Germany, this is only 20 years after World War II had ended. The reason it was being supplied to Germany in considerable quantity, by the way, Russia has vast supplies of natural gas, but one thing they didn't have was the ability to manufacture the pipes in which to transport it.
Right.
Let alone the compressors to drive the gas down these 2,000-kilometer long pipelines. So they entered into a very legitimate deal with Germany, who had the technology to make the 1.5 meter diameter pipes in the quantity required. They said, you supply us the pipes, we'll supply you the gas. Simple. And that's what happened. Was it really in Russia's interests to upset Germany, Italy, Austria, America, and all the other countries by making some ridiculous claim about not landing on the moon? No, of course not. This is what's high politics. These things go on below the surface. Now, how many people even knew that that was when the contracts were first drawn up to supply gas into Europe? Very few. It's all quite legitimately laid out. You can find the details, as I did, in a book called Red Gas. Check it out.
Absolutely. Anyway, conscious of the time, 10 minutes past 7 p.m. already. So let's hear what you've been saying from Lexi.
Hello, you've been saying an awful lot. On Melanie, Merritt says, bless her. Good on you guys for visiting her.
Thank you.
And Wendy says, Peterborough is the nearest jail for women to Nottingham. Others are at Style in Wimslow and Wakefield. Also, Interflora do deliver to prisons.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Fraggle on the moon. It was Armstrong who reported that they were landing on the surface at 33 degrees. I think he went wink, wink after that phrase. Gary M says NASA could have sent unmanned vehicles to the moon, kept the astronauts in Earth's orbit, and used test footage from Area 10.
Okay.
Keith Milton, Moon Doom. Thanks to Alex and Brian for visiting Melanie as well.
Mm-hmm.
Lordy, on the moon rocks. I'm going to do that with rocks from my garden and sell them for £5.
Oh, yes. Oh, the entrepreneur's about already. Don't tell Alan Sugar for God's sake.
Fraggle says hello rather frantically to me. So hello. And D. Oberman says they also had really a nonsensical explanation as to why don't we see stars in the photos. I seem to recall that the sun was so bright that it overshone the stars.
Yeah.
Paul Mack, going to the moon was also a political sting, as the Americans wanted to beat the Russians, as promised by Kennedy, that they would have a man on the moon before the decade is out.
Yes, that's very true.
Yes, on Ebola, GoBank says it started off in the sub-Saharan jungle regions. Fraggle, big pharmaceuticals are rubbing their hands and the UN are smiling at the potential depopulation.
Too right.
Paul R says a German hospital now has an Ebola patient from Africa at the World Health Organization's request. Madness. Ken 50. Predictive programming. How many movies have been promoting this type of terror virus?
Plenty.
Yes. UK Kev. A good drama series to learn about viruses is called Regenesis.
Yeah. That's from about 7-8 years ago on Sci-Fi, I think, had it.
When Graham was on, D. Oberman said, oh, my favourite doctor, please tell him I've started taking vitamin C. I had an infection and it went away.
Oh,
We're
yes.
all pleased for you.
Vitamin yes, don't go into any detail on the infection, but yeah, vitamin C, the right sort of vitamin C, goodness me, yes.
Wendy Hurst makes a very, very good point about the moon. How did they work the cameras with such huge gloves on?
Oh, the cameras and the gloves,
Something
yes.
Andy Thomas covered as well. D. Oberman, the EU are flapping because Germany wants to take in Ebola patients. Why do they want to take them in? Maiko, sounds like Merkel is trying to collapse the EU. I wouldn't lose any sleep if she succeeds.
Unless that's exactly what they were planning in the first place for what comes next.
Lordy has a question for Marcus. What was the purpose of the moon landing's lie?
What was the purpose
of the lie?
Purpose of the lie, yeah. Suppose we vaguely covered that. We'll come back to that. Any more?
Yes, Wendy. My neighbours are in sheltered housing. They're all over 60 years old. They will not believe that the moon landings are not real. We saw it on TV, so it must have happened.
That's it. It's been in the papers. Yes,
true,
it must be real.
It's in magazines, yes.
Yes, they said on the news. It must be true. Yes.
Also, the moon rocks had numbers on them. A couple of people have been saying that in the photographs, that they had numbers on them. And UK Kev on Ebola. He says Ebola will be the reason for the vaccines. The vaccines will do the damage.
Yeah, this was a point discussing before the show that why would they have the vaccines? What is the point of the vaccines? The vaccines, well, they don't do what they say on the tin. And I always look to the case of our seasonal flu jab. Our seasonal flu jab caters for what they knew last year. So this year's sorts out last year's. And of course, the way that things develop with these bugs is that as we come to this year, they've mutated way beyond what they used to be. So guess what? The flu jab is virtually ineffective. It doesn't do anything. It's no more than a placebo. Marcus, we've sort of touched on the moon landing and the purpose of the lie. And as you said, you mentioned the fact that JFK basically wrote the check at the start of the 60s in terms of we're going to land a man on the moon by the end of the 60s, and they managed it with about 5 months to spare. And again, that became a matter of national pride. We've covered things in the past with Andy Thomas when we've been talking about the moon landings in terms of whistleblowers and Apollo 1. I mean, we've mentioned Melanie Shaw in terms of whistleblowing on child abuse, but then on Apollo 1, you had people whistleblowing that this was not going to work. And then guess what? All 3 crew of Apollo 1 die in a fire on the landing gantry.
That's correct. Yep. It was Gus Grissom, who was one of the 3 astronauts in Apollo 1 on that test, who, when he left home for that, just prior to that, in January 1967, he picked a lemon off one of his trees, he lived in Florida, to be able to put it onto the spacecraft to demonstrate what he thought of it. Now, if you thought that... Right, NASA employ a lot of scientists, very intelligent scientists, most of them must be. Yeah. That test that killed 3 astronauts was a ground test. It was on top of the gantry. And what they were doing was testing the gas that was going to be in Apollo 1 at the temperature, at the pressure at which it was going to be operating in space. Now, they were pumping in pure oxygen at a pressure in excess of atmospheric pressure. It was being pumped in at about 19 pounds per square inch, which is 5 pounds above atmospheric pressure. The 5 pound per square inch was meant to represent the pressure that would be in the capsule when they were in space, because that 5 pound per square inch is the minimum pressure that a human can survive. So 19 pound per square inch of pure oxygen. Anybody who's done basic physics will tell you that that is not only lethal, but extremely dangerous. It will explode. Oxygen under pressure, all it needs was a spark. This is an unfinished spacecraft they're getting into, with a door that took 10 minutes to open. That's how well designed the thing was. It was I will not swear live on television. It was not a very good piece of kit. Let's put it that way. 10 minutes to get them out. They were dead before they could get the door open. And they were pumping in pure oxygen at high pressure, and they didn't think it was going to explode. And these are scientists trying to get man to the moon. No wonder Gus Grissom was a bit upset.
Yeah.
And there was a documentary that came out about 10 years ago called Conspiracy Theory, Did We Land on the Moon?, in which Gus Grissom's son, who was himself a pilot and a scientist, said on that program that his father had been murdered. Now, that is a very serious accusation to make, and it's never been corrected. Gus Grissom was actually slated. He was going to be the first man on the moon. He was one of the most competent and able of the astronauts. And he was actually listed as being the first man to land on the moon. Unfortunately, he never made it.
Because he had the courage of his convictions and could see that this, as you say, that this was the ultimate lemon. Duncan Rhodes, the editor of Nexus magazine, in his editorial, interesting little piece which I picked up this afternoon. He says, I'm often asked about whether I think NASA astronauts landed on the moon. My current theory is that if they did get there, NASA must have had some reason to fake the photos and films of the entire landing and moonwalk sequences. My suspicion is that NASA wanted to hide what propulsion and shielding technologies were really being used and what conditions are actually like in deep space and on the moon. So, in other words, the reason for the footage, which is you've got photography magazines that have tore apart these pictures to say that these are staged in a studio. You know, they've got no beef to grind on this at all. They're just looking at it as professional photographers and going, these are bogus. And why would you do that? Again, we get onto the why questions, which are the ones where we can only speculate, and again, that's where the theories come in amongst the facts that we're talking about tonight. But could it well be that I think it was in Alternative 3, Shane Rimmer played the bogus astronaut in that, who basically said what we're riding to the moon is the equivalent of a bicycle. What's really going up there is something completely different. I mean, is that the possibility here, that they've actually got to hide how far in advance technology really is beyond what is actually out there in the shop windows?
That is actually a very interesting point, because it ties a lot of things together. The term the Lockheed Skunk Works, which was a very famous aircraft establishment in California. They built the U-2 spy plane, they built the SR-71 Blackbird. And the guy who ran that place was called Ben Rich.
Yeah.
And he said towards the end of his life, he was being interviewed for I think it was Aerospace Magazine or something like that. He was being interviewed, and he was asked a question to which his answer was, we have the ability to fly to the stars. Meaning we currently, our current technological understanding, we have the ability to fly to the stars. He never elaborated on what he meant. The point is, he was involved with technologies so far in advance of that which was known to exist at the time he was working on them. The Blackbird SR-71 flew at Mach 3, it's over 2,000 miles an hour. It flew at 80,000 feet. No plane, no rocket, no weapon could touch it, and it was first flown in 1964. It wasn't even publicly announced for another 20 years. We now hear about the Aurora program. There isn't a plane called the Aurora, it's the TR-35B, which is alleged to be a triangular-shaped plane which can operate in atmosphere and in space. So to come back to the original point you made, that Duncan wrote about, the technologies which existed back in the 1960s appear to have a far greater ability to allow man to travel to the stars, to the planets, to the moon even, than we've even been told. Now, where it came from, Duncan has mentioned this many times to me in the past. He says, yeah, they're sitting on technologies they're not even prepared to come anywhere close to talking about. You mentioned Alternative 3.
Yeah.
That was filmed in 1976. It was a long, long time ago. Some of the even though the book and the film was fiction, you mentioned Rimmer, who was an actor. There was a cast list at the end of the program. After all, it was a drama documentary more than anything else. But it was building on certain pieces of information which were becoming public knowledge in the mid-1970s. And it caused a considerable stir, that program, when it was first transmitted. I actually watched it when it first came out. It's only ever been transmitted once.
Yes.
On 1st of April 1976, apparently. It was actually transmitted in June. But it mentioned many things. And the reason it's called Alternative 3 is because it was to do with global warming, ironically. That was the origin of the program. And Alternative 1 was blow a hole in the upper atmosphere to let the heat out. That actually happened. It's called Operation Starfish Prime, where a nuclear bomb was generated 250 miles above an island south of Hawaii. That wasn't a very good idea. Alternative 2, build underground cities and bases. Well, that's happened. Cheyenne Mountain. And alternative 3 was to colonize the moon and specifically Mars.
Yes.
Maybe that is happening. And Apollo and the Constellation program and all the other nonsense that's going on in space is purely cover for the fact that they can fly and operate way beyond Earth. When Gary McKinnon was arrested and asked why he'd broken into the NASA and various other high-profile American military establishments, he said, well, I was looking for evidence about UFOs, and I found a lot of strange stuff. And one of the things he claimed to have found was a list of American military personnel who were stationed off-planet. What's that all about?
Indeed.
So maybe that's why they got so upset with him. He wasn't doing any harm. He wasn't doing any damage. He was just a very, very clever computer person who happens to...
The ridiculousness about it, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, it's 26 minutes past 7 p.m. I do need to take a stage break. I'm actually 6 minutes late. Oh, my word. But afterwards, I want to talk to you about landing on and taking off from the lunar surface from this new article in the latest issue of Nexus magazine. Here it is. And what the problems there are there. Meanwhile, here is how you text us or email us.
Use your mobile phone to keep in touch with Peterborough FM. Why not text us on 60777. That's 60777. Begin your message with 337PC. That's 337PC. PC for Peterborough Community. A space, then your comment. Standard network text charges apply. Alternatively, send us an email via studio@peterborough.fm. That's studio@peterborough.fm. One station, many communities. And we're waiting to hear from you. Serving up the beats and making it hot.
Friday, 10 o'clock a.m. Playing the music you love. On your computer, on your smartphone, only on www.peterborough.fm. Get ready for the bounce.
Bringing the ladies to their knees and the best DJ around, Tom Mutiny.
Doomwatch. Fridays, 6 until 8 p.m. on Peterborough.fm and UK Column Live.
And it is 28 minutes past 7 p.m. Our guest this evening is Marcus Allen, the UK publisher of Nexus magazine. Welcome back again, Marcus.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Always good to be here.
Indeed. I think we may have to have you back already. Anyway, here is Lexi to tell us what has been occurring.
Lots. Again, Ken50 says, I think there was more to the China moon mission recently. The thought had crossed my mind. I thought their video looked too much like the 60s NASA film.
Okay.
I am not David Icke. Stars can be seen in daylight on Earth from a very deep canyon.
Right, yeah, but the stars in the sky and not on the moon, yeah.
D. Oberman says it was a tooth infection, Alex. The vitamin C.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Merritt says, Lexi, please ask Wendy how the weather is today. A little inside joke going on, I think. I don't know.
Okay.
One of our other viewers. Sean from Bicester has texted, question for Marcus. What do you say to astronomers who say that they can bounce a laser off of a receiver that was placed on the moon by humans? It's the debug brigade's trump card.
Yeah, definitely. Should we take that one now? Marcus, yes, the astronomers are bouncing lasers off bits on the moon, so consequently that's where they are.
Oh, of course. And they're bouncing them off the moon on mirrors that were left there by the Apollo astronauts on Apollo 11, 12, and 14. So they must have got there to leave the mirrors there to bounce the lasers off. No, the Russians did it as well. They left two mirrors up there. Now, if you ask any astronomer, okay, if they're going to bounce a laser off a mirror on the moon, how do they know where the mirror is? What are the coordinates of that mirror? Can you tell me, please? Because if you're going to bounce a laser off, you've got to point it in the right general direction. Let's go back to I think it was 1941, when America were about to enter the war. This was all pre-planned, obviously. Pearl Harbor was known about before it happened, so whatever. Anyway, they had to find a secure means of communication.
Yeah.
And the way they found to do it was very simple. They could bounce signals, radio signals, off the moon.
Right.
And that's been going on for a long time. There's very little difference between bouncing a radio signal or a radar signal or any piece of electronic kit off the moon, because it's a reflective surface. That's why we have moonlight. So
what you're saying is you don't even need mirrors to do what these astronomers are doing.
You don't need mirrors. Now, the other question I would have, I've been asked this question many times, and I always ask one question in response. I say, okay, if you're going to bounce a laser off the moon, what diameter is the laser beam when it reaches the moon?
Right.
And they sort of think about it for a while, and furrowed brows and mathematics come into play. Well, the answer is 2 kilometers. It's quite big. Lasers over that distance, as you said at the beginning, 238,000 miles is the distance between the moon and the Earth.
Yeah.
If you shine a laser, a very powerful laser, obviously, it will diverge. The beam will spread. It will just go a little bit like that.
Yeah.
So it's 2 kilometers when it gets to the moon. So you don't even need a mirror, for goodness sake. Just the surface of the moon will do. Now, the next question is, what diameter is that laser when it gets back to Earth? And the answer is 10 kilometers. So what size receiver do you need to have to ensure that you can pick up enough photons, by that time they're individual photons, to ensure that you have got that same laser beam reflected back to you so you can tell how far away the moon is? I mean, it is, if any astronomer still considers that is the key question which proves they got there, they're not paying attention. They haven't read the history. Come on, guys, get a life, get on with it, and find out something much more interesting. Because that sort of question demonstrates ignorance. It doesn't demonstrate ability to tear an argument apart. End of these rant.
And these people are alleged scientists as well, would you believe? Anyway, more from Lexi. Let's see what we've got.
Yes, we've got more. D. Aberman, this is slightly odd. NASA claims that space smells like steak.
What?
Now, how do they know that? Yes, I would like to know.
Okay, yeah.
Danny Boyo says, it still doesn't explain when you see the film of one of the Apollo films that shows the astronauts stripping the capsule out to get back because of a fault. The capsule was so light in weight and structure it would have burnt up, but they got back.
Interesting.
Lily Cat Baby says, Richard D. Hall has done a lot of research on this.
Oh, indeed. Good man, Richard. Eventually I will get him on the show.
Yes. I think that would be good. Lots of people mention him. Keith Milton, have you watched now I'm terrible at pronunciation, as you know. Widener's Kubrick's Odyssey. It is Widener's, isn't it? Or is it Widener's? Widener's.
Yeah,
Widener's.
we've spoken about it before. This is basically looking at 2001 and the clues in 2001, and of course the clues in The Shining, as to the fact that maybe perhaps Kubrick was showing in The Shining, but yes, he did direct the moon footage, and this was his little sort of testimony to the great unwashed as to what had really gone on.
Also, by the way, Lexi has a double here in Bournemouth.
Really?
Lots of people say this, you know.
You just go down to Bournemouth quite a lot. That's what it is.
Never been. Apparently there's someone walking around Peterborough who looks the same as me as well. Hello, if you're on my double. And Fraggle, there have been many reports of a big black triangle over Manchester airports from pilots.
Oh, the big black triangle. Right, okay. Marcus, I'm taking this one because I've never heard this one at all. Space smells like steak, apparently.
I wonder where that came from. I wonder who was in space, because there isn't anything in space. You can't smell something that doesn't exist. Space is a vacuum.
Yeah, you never know. This might have been that Kubrick had a barbecue out back when he was filming the footage or something. It's the only thing I can figure out on this. Goodness me. They were saying about stripping out a space capsule. I'm assuming this must be, what, Apollo 13, that they had to do loads of sort of jiggery pokery, allegedly, to get Apollo 13 back. I mean, it does open up a whole can of worms, that why have Apollo 13 getting into deep doo-doo and then having all this narrative about the ingenuity and being able to get the guys back. I mean, surely it beggars belief. Why do it if the whole campaign is a charade? Because it would... if you go back to the time it was happening, Apollo 11, the one that everybody remembers and talks about, most people can name at least one of the astronauts on Apollo 11, but can you name the astronauts on Apollo 17? Probably not, let alone any astronaut on the space shuttle. There's been 200 of them. Yeah. Apollo 11, successful first landing, everybody stayed up and watched it. 600 million people watched it on television. Wonderful event. We all know where we were when it happened and all that. 5 months later, Apollo 12, still in 1969, December 1969, landed. And because NASA interrupted programs like I Love Lucy and other similar soap operas of the time, they got thousands of complaints through to the television companies. How dare you show these things and interrupt our program? And then Apollo 12, they managed to burn out their video cameras by pointing it at the sun, which really wasn't a wise thing to do. No. So they had to jazz the whole Apollo program up again for Apollo 13, which was following in April 1970. And they have a space rescue. This is space opera at its most exciting. And we all, at the edge of our seat, waiting for them to come home. Will our heroes be saved? Well, if they never got out of Earth orbit, which is quite likely, it's very likely that they were going to be saved, because coming back from Earth orbit really isn't a major problem. Now, one of the points to bear in mind about Apollo 13 is that it was deliberately staged as a diversionary tactic. There was always something going on with each Apollo mission. Apollo 14, for instance, that was the famous moonshot, the golf shot on the lunar surface by Alan Shepard. He took a golf club up, he took I think it was a 6-iron or something like that, attached it to a bit of equipment he had up there, and he had a golf ball and hit it. And you'd think, well, if you're going to hit a golf ball on the moon, it's going to go a long, long way. Well, it didn't actually go very far at all. The interesting thing about that is that in his biography, Alan Shepard published a photograph of him hitting this golf ball. When I say a photograph, it was not a video still of the same scene. This photograph showed the two astronauts on the lunar surface at the same time. Well, who took the picture? There are only two of them there. They didn't have timers on their Hasselblad cameras. So we have that as a diversionary tactic. And that photograph was blown up to about 5 foot across and on display at the Kennedy Space Center. Until 4 or 5 years ago, we pointed out that the photograph was a fake. And it could be demonstrated to be a fake. It was actually a montage of 5 other images. And surprise, surprise, NASA took it down. It hasn't been seen since. I wonder why. Don't they like being caught out in these things? HSBC closes some Muslim groups' accounts. Apparently, they were outside the bank's risk appetite.
10 till 12. 2 hours of mirth, mayhem, music and biscuits. Get in. For Saturday morning, pick me some Peterborough FM.
Reporting today for a future tomorrow. The watchdog you can trust. This is Doomwatch. Detection observation. Official dumb media. Worldwide analysis. Technology. Corruption. Health. This is the definition of Doomwatch. Friday, 6 until 8 p.m. on Peterborough.fm.
And the time is 7:45. I think we're all back and running. Thank you to everybody who said, there's no picture. Yes. And a little bit of jiggery-pokery at our end has sorted it all out. We do give palpitations to everybody. Marcus Allen, the UK publisher of Nexus magazine, is our guest. Are you there, Marcus?
I am indeed. Can you hear me as well?
Oh, I can.
You can. Oh, that's good. All I'll say is the conspiracy didn't work that time, did it?
Yes, Uncle Tom was fiddling with his leads under the table, and that seemed to do the trick. Anyway, for the last time this evening, yes, it's Lexi Watch, as it's been named. Here's Lexi.
Yes, Paul R is quite funny. I wait all week to see Lexi Watch, and now the stream's gone down. Sounds slightly stalkerish, but thank you. Yes, I may have to get a security guard. Fraggle on space smelling like steak. They filmed it in a butcher's. They probably did. For sustenance.
Stanley Kubrick's Burger King. Yeah, that's it.
Explains why the astronauts were hamming it up.
Oh, don't quit your day job. D. Oberman, the state comment came from a German newspaper and apparently from serious research.
Right, okay, yes.
There are cancers to research, people, not steak smelling like space and space smelling like steak.
Okay. It's been a long show. It's been a long show.
Go Banks, by 1972 the golf shots were boring.
Well, that's true. Golf on the moon, yes. Oh, yes. Proving they can play golf on the moon. There's always something suspicious about that. Oh.
Fraggle, I totally agree with Marcus. Get him back on Skype.
Well, we have.
We have,
yes. Can I do a Basil Fawlty? Yes, we know. Yes, can we get you a mastermind specialist subject? The bleeding obvious.
Wendy wants to know when the police commissioner is back on again, we can question him about Melanie, corruption, and naughty people.
Oh, not his territory. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Nottingham, it's not Cambridgeshire. You can hear the answers already, can't you? But anyway, yeah, we will try. We will try.
Keith Milton, now would be a good time for Russia to reveal the moon hoax.
Ooh, hey, that's a point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And on when the Skype just went down, Mike said, Houston, we have a problem. Pratvod has raided the Doomwatch studio.
Oi!
I think Pratvod should be their official name.
I think,
now
yes.
on.
I think that's... anybody who hasn't sort of applied for that Atvod job that we told you about a couple of weeks ago, I think the good line would be, basically, first thing, we need to rebrand. After all the dreadful Atvod connotations that we now got, we suggest a rebranding to Pratvod and then come up with a good pseudonym as to what all the letters stand for. Or maybe not, just say you're just acting like it. So there we go. We've just put a PR on the front. That's it, public relations for Pratvod. That's Pratvod, yes. So, Marcus, in terms of getting into the article, which we are sort of promoing from the latest edition of Nexus magazine, available in all good news agents and some scurrilous ones as well, thankfully. Landing on and taking off from the lunar surface is a particular section of this. And again, this has sort of intrigue all over it once more in terms of what the paperwork has said in terms of the Constellation program and the apparent non-links to anything involving the Apollo program.
That is one of the key points of the article. It's a serious article. It's got good references. Anybody can check out the data that's been referred to. Why aren't they using the technology that was developed for the Apollo program? for Constellation. Constellation gets cancelled, and we have the Orion capsule, which is supposed to look rather like the Apollo capsule, and they can't even build a rocket strong enough to launch the things, let alone a heat shield to protect them coming back. So the whole thing looks like a complete fabrication to justify NASA's existence. Of course, you know that NASA stands for the National Academy of Space Actors. So you shouldn't really be too upset when they start acting up. Sorry. Right, gravity wells. How do you get off the moon? How do you launch a rocket? Because that's the point you were referring to.
Yeah,
that if you go to land, and I did like the comment that one of your callers referred to Apollo reverse parking on the moon. I thought it was very clever. Reverse parking. It had to slow down by firing its rocket so that it would land gently on the lunar surface. Of course, that is a technology that's never ever been used by anybody since, or even before, to use a single rocket to slow you down until you will land virtually at walking pace. Yeah. And then the problem existed of how do you get back up again off the lunar surface? Right, the gravity is nowhere near as strong as it is on Earth. It's 1/6 the gravity, or 16% of that of Earth. So you'll still need a rocket to do it with, but rockets aren't that easy. They have to be controlled. And if you don't control it, if you get it wrong the first time, you tend to crash, which has happened a few times on Earth when they've tried to land a rocket on Earth by reverse parking it using a retro rocket. It doesn't work, or not very easily. You need about 3 rockets to do it so that you land comfortably. Yeah. Now, as for the Russians blowing the whistle, that was an interesting point there made again. They have blown the whistle. Oh, right. Several Russian physicists, Russian scientists who worked on the Russian space program, and Russian filmmakers who've also examined some of the Apollo footage, specifically of the rocket taking off, of the Saturn V rocket taking off. They've examined it and said that the rocket was not traveling fast enough to have launched the weight it was supposed to launch into lunar orbit. Now, obviously, if you're firing a rocket, it has to have a certain amount of power to lift a certain weight. Like a car will accelerate much faster if it's got a 500 horsepower engine than if it's got a 100 horsepower engine. It's logical. So if the rocket wasn't traveling fast enough to launch that, was the Saturn V rocket everything it was cracked up to be? Because we've already heard they're not using any of the technology from the Saturn V rocket on the new launching of the Orion space capsule, let alone using anything to get into space with. So you've got these anomalies coming up, and the Russians are, now that Russia has access to the Apollo data, they're examining it in considerable detail. And one particular sequence, which I did like, was you may be familiar with the Mythbusters program that had looked at some of the Apollo alleged hoax images and decided that no, it wasn't hoaxed, it was all completely legitimate. The Russians decided to try to recreate the Mythbusters program and found that the only way they could do it was by faking it. Oh dear. So you've got fakery all along. And you may remember the famous sequence of Bart Sibrel, who decided, he's a big lad, so he can take care of himself. He was going to go and ask all the Apollo astronauts to swear on a Bible, which he had, that they had actually landed and walked on the moon. So Buzz Aldrin takes a swing at him and hits him. Neil Armstrong claims that the Bible is faked and just runs away. Why, if they walked on the moon, why didn't they just swear, give me a stack of Bibles, I'll swear as many as you want to. Of course I walked on the moon. Didn't you see it on television? No. They all basically refused to do it. Very strange, I think. Very strange. It should be explained. Of course, Neil Armstrong has now passed on, and he was an honourable man, I'm sure, in his own way, and he wouldn't have lied. He wasn't a civilian. He was a naval pilot, He flew 100 missions in Korea, and he was the pilot of the X-15 rocket plane, which flew to the edge of space, about 40 miles up. He had signed the Official Secrets Act. There's no way Neil Armstrong was going to break ranks as any of the other astronauts were going to do either. They were going to stay, keep the story going. Nobody is going to break ranks. It doesn't happen. Military people do not do that. So this mystery will go on. Nobody will, like the US president, he won't get up on a platform somewhere and say, oh yeah, there's Apollo, these guys who question it, they're quite right. He's not going to say that.
No
He's
way.
going to maintain the fiction. So it's down to people like me and a few other people who have questioned it legitimately and in public to continue. And I can recommend a website where there's a lot of good information about it. The website is Aulis, AULIS.com.
Right.
Check it out. Worth a look.
AULIS.com.
AULIS.com. Very
Terrific.
interesting articles on there. And the article that is in Nexus this issue is going to be published on that website, aulis.com, at midnight tonight.
Fantastic. Marcus, the time has flown by. Thank you very much for joining us. Will you come back and join us soon?
When they land on the moon, can I come and discuss it?
I think so. Definitely. Don't forget, Doomwatch is off for the next 2 weeks, but we are back on the 22nd of August. There's what we're part of. That's it, the Beer Festival. The Beer Festival in Peterborough. Come and join us for Doomwatch on the 22nd, live and direct on an outside broadcast once more. It's AV5, except to the max. Yes, indeed. Hope you have a good summer break away from us all. Of course, the cameras will keep rolling in terms of repeats on ukcolumn.org/live. And don't forget to check out all the other great shows on peterborough.fm. We'll see you again in 3 weeks.